In other news and overseas tonight, an American aircraft carrier and 3 destroyers have arrived in the Middle East.
As President Trump has said time and time again for years, and in this administration, Iran cannot have a nuclear bomb, and they won't.
The most dangerous trap at sea is not the one that explodes first. It is the one you do not realize is already closing. In the Strait of Hormuz, everything looks calm until it doesn't. Tankers keep moving, escorts hold formation, radar screens keep glowing. Above the water, discipline. Beneath the water, silence. And that silence is exactly where the real danger begins. Because if a U.S. carrier ever found itself entering a narrow lane while multiple Ghadir mini-submarines were already spread across the choke point, this would not look like a battle at first. It would look like routine movement. It would look normal. That is what makes it terrifying. These are not giant hunter-killers crossing oceans. These are small, hard-to-detect, shallow-water ambush platforms built for one thing: turning geography into a weapon. In a place as narrow, crowded, and politically explosive as Hormuz, that matters more than raw size. And that is the nightmare scenario here. Not a loud first shot, not a dramatic warning, a silent net tightening under one of the most important waterways on Earth. To understand why this idea hits so hard, you have to understand Hormuz itself. This strait is not
been no
just
draft
another
since
waterway.
Vietnam, and the idea felt like a historical footnote. In 2025, the footnote started moving. Rolling Stone documented the wave of military draft misinformation flooding TikTok following the Iran strikes. AI-generated videos simulating forced conscription of American men to fight Iran racked up millions of views. The videos were fake. The fear was not. Young people in Germany faced the same reckoning, as European defense officials began discussing the possibility of reinstating some form of national service to meet NATO commitments. One German Gen Z writer articulated the generational fracture with brutal precision. We became soft because we were told the hard times were over, they wrote. We learned peace. And now those same people who taught us peace are surprised we won't die for a war they created. What city are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. I want to know how this is landing in a genuinely global conversation, and the comment section on this channel is always where the real discussion happens. Here is the part of this story that nobody is closure. Wars running in parallel. A nuclear arms race with no active treaty to constrain it. A climate system recording its warmest years in the 100.
This does not sound like the thing that should terrify a superpower. It is small, compact, built for
Z has no buffer. The missile strike and the TikTok about the missile strike arrive simultaneously. The Doomsday Clock announcement and the mocking comment about the Doomsday Clock announcement exist in the same scroll. Reality and the commentary on reality have collapsed into one single experience with no boundary between them and no off switch that doesn't feel like abandonment. This is not a generational weakness. This is a new form of exposure that has never existed before, and it is doing something to human psychology that we do not yet fully understand. A 2025 Pew Research study on teens, social media, and mental health found that parents are more worried about teen mental health than the teens themselves, which sounds reassuring until you understand that the teens aren't less worried, they're more numbed. They have been processing catastrophe at such volume and such speed that the neurological alarm system has been recalibrated toward constant low-grade dread rather than acute crisis response. That is the world those scientists at the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists measured when they set the clock to 85 seconds. Not just geopolitical danger, compound existential
exposure. It does not need to sink the flagship to shape the battlefield. It just needs to make certainty disappear. And here is where the trap becomes more than just submarines. Because no serious Hormuz scenario is ever only underwater. It is layered: fast boats on the surface, coastal missile batteries on land, drones in the air, mines in the lanes, information warfare online, rumors across markets. And under all of that, maybe several mini-subs sitting still, waiting for the one moment when confusion becomes a weapon. That is why a carrier group in this environment has to think in circles, not straight lines. It cannot just ask, can we destroy the subs? It has to ask, what is the subsurface picture? Are there mines? Are small craft baiting us?
Fully to agency. Joseph Priller, the German pilot who mocked American fighters as pregnant cows in 1940.
Is the target military or economic panic?
Gave an interview 2 years later that his own government considered too demoralizing to publish. We laughed at them, he said. We're not laughing now. The generation that got the apocalypse before the game dropped. The generation that posts WW3 outfit content at 2 a.m. with 2.3 million people hitting like. Not because they're unserious, but because they recognize each other in the absurdity. The generation that grew up being told the hard times were over and then watched the hard times come back, one notification at a time, one crisis at a time, one expired arms treaty at a time. What happens to this generation depends entirely on a question that history will answer for us. Does the world give them room to become what they're capable of becoming? Or does the clock reach midnight before they get the chance? The scientist said 85 seconds. Last year, it was 89. The year before that, 90. The direction of that clock has not changed. And somewhere right now, a kid born in 2004 is looking at that number, understanding exactly what it means, and posting a meme about it at 2 a.m. because that is the only language that makes the weight of it survivable. That's not weakness. That's a new kind of armor. The only question is whether the world is smart enough.
Pressure. That is how a silent trap unfolds, one layer at a time, until a force designed for dominance is forced into suspicion. If you think people are sleepwalking through how dangerous these choke points really are, comment "Wake up" below. I want to know who still understands that the scariest military moves are usually the quiet ones. Now imagine the timeline. A carrier group is reported moving closer. Commercial traffic is already stressed. Regional tensions are high. Insurance markets start whispering. Energy traders start gaming outcomes. Analysts begin watching satellite images. Social media accounts start posting grainy claims. Some false, some planted, some may be real. Then reports surface that mini submarines have been activated or repositioned. No confirmed attack, no confirmed intercept, no dramatic footage. But suddenly, every transit becomes a story. That is the genius of this kind of pressure strategy. It infects everything beyond the battlefield. Markets feel it, allies feel it, shipping companies feel it, newsrooms feel it, and the carrier itself becomes more than a warship. It becomes a symbol under surveillance. That matters because symbolic pressure is still pressure. A force like this does not have to win cleanly in a conventional fight to create a strategic effect. And it only has to make one of the world's most critical waterways feel unstable enough that everyone else starts reacting before the first confirmed strike ever happens. And once that chain reaction begins, the strait stops being just a location. It becomes leverage. But let's go deeper, because this is where the fear becomes real. A carrier group survives by awareness, layers, and reach. It sees far, it hits far, it defends in layers. But shallow water submarine threats are not meant to challenge those strengths head-on. They are meant to creep underneath them. A mini-sub does not have to chase the carrier across oceans. It only has to exist in the right place at the right time, near a transit lane, near a turn point, near a narrow stretch where escorts must stay disciplined and ships cannot improvise endlessly without disrupting the entire formation. And remember, this is not just about a torpedo. It is about the burden of uncertainty. If one contact is suspected, the escorts tighten. If several are suspected, aviation assets are tasked differently. If mines are also feared, calculations change again. If coastal missiles enter the picture, every move becomes more compressed. Now the carrier is still dangerous, maybe more dangerous than anything else in theater. But danger is not freedom. Even the strongest force becomes more rigid when too many invisible variables start stacking at once. That is when the silent net stops sounding theoretical. It starts feeling close. And this is why so many people misunderstand what surround really means in a place like Hormuz. It does not mean cinematic circles and dramatic reveal shots. It means angles, coverage, presence, probabilities. It means enough hidden platforms in enough meaningful positions that the operating picture starts to close around the target. That is what makes it so unnerving. The trap is not geometric. It is cognitive. You do not need a perfect ring around a carrier. You need enough uncertainty in enough directions, enough plausible ambush points, enough hidden launch zones, enough questions that the formation starts defending against possibilities instead of acting on confidence. That is how a smaller undersea force can appear larger than it is. And once the story becomes, how many are out there? The effect multiplies all by itself. If you want me to keep breaking down how the entire kill web closes, sea, air, coast, and markets, type "locked" in the comments. Because once you see how all the pieces fit together, you can't unsee it. Now let's talk about why this topic performs so hard with viewers. It flips the expected power image upside down. People are used to seeing carriers as untouchable symbols of overwhelming force, massive deck, constant air wing, destroyers in formation, radar everywhere. And in open ocean, that image makes sense. But Hormuz is not open ocean. Hormuz is the kind of place where geography strips away spectacle and rewards whoever prepared best for compression, clutter, and timing. That does not erase U.S. naval power. Far from it. But it changes the emotional picture. Suddenly the question is not who is bigger. And the question is who is better adapted to the room they are fighting in. And that is why the Ghadir story grabs people, because it feels like a David and Goliath inversion under the surface. Small hulls, narrow water, massive stakes. Even if no shot is fired, viewers instantly understand the tension. A giant force enters a tight corridor while something smaller and quieter may already be waiting below. That image is powerful, that image is cinematic, and that image is exactly why this angle keeps pulling attention. It turns dominance into vulnerability without ever needing to shout. But here is the uncomfortable truth. The real target in a Hormuz confrontation might not be the carrier at all. The real target could be the idea of uncontested passage, the belief that the waterway remains psychologically open under pressure, and the confidence that global traffic can move without fear. That is where mini submarines become more than naval tools. They become instruments of doubt, because even one credible threat under the water forces protective behavior above it. Convoys change pace, routes get reviewed, insurance premiums jump, headlines intensify. Analysts start talking about escalation ladders, oil reacts, diplomats scramble, and suddenly the world is reacting to something nobody has clearly seen. That is a form of power too, and this is why the silent trap concept is so effective as a story. It reveals that modern conflict is not always about the loudest weapon. Sometimes it is about the invisible pressure point that makes every larger system begin to tremble. Once that happens, a mini-submarine is no longer just a vessel. Remember, it becomes a trigger for global anxiety. Now ask yourself this. If the carrier group knows the trap is possible, does that make it safe? Not necessarily. Awareness helps. Counter-submarine doctrine helps. Air cover helps. Escorts help. Intelligence helps. But in a narrow, politically charged choke point, every defensive success still costs time, attention, and resources. And time is everything when the entire region is watching for one mistake. This is why these scenarios are so dangerous. They compress military risk and political risk into the same narrow lane. A sonar contact is never just a sonar contact. A suspected mine is never just a mine. A delay is never just a delay. Everything becomes a signal. And the longer the signal lasts, the more the world begins projecting meaning onto it. So even without a confirmed strike, the trap can still work by forcing everybody into a higher level of fear than they were prepared to admit. If this breakdown is opening your eyes, share this video with someone who still thinks
has decided to test. This is the
is
story
only
of our
about
generation,
size.
the one that got the
Choke points
apocalypse
like
before the
this,
game
what
dropped,
is hidden
the one
can
that was
matter
handed
more
broken
than what is
systems and a
visible.
burning world
Of
and then
course,
laughed about
none
it
of
at
this
2
means
a.m.
a
in a
carrier
6-second
group
video
is
clip.
helpless.
This is the
That would
story
be
of what
lazy
actually happens when
analysis.
Generation
The
Z
US
walks into a
carrier
war
strike
it was
group
never
brings
supposed to have to
immense
fight, armed with
anti-submarine
nothing but a phone,
capacity,
a dark
layered
sense of humor,
defense,
and an
airborne
anxiety disorder
surveillance,
that its health
escort
insurance
ships,
doesn't cover.
intelligence
And if you
support,
think that's a
and the
tragedy,
ability
you
to
haven't been
strike
paying
back
attention.
hard if an
If this
attack is
kind of
confirmed.
content hits different for
Any
you,
mini-submarine
subscribe before
force
we
that
keep
actually
going.
fires
This channel
risks
breaks down the
immediate
moments that
and
define our
overwhelming
generation, the ones the
retaliation.
news cycle
That danger
processes and
cuts
moves on
both
from,
ways.
the ones that
But again,
actually matter for the
that does
people living
not
through them
erase
right
the
now.
trap.
The
It
mockery
explains
started
why the
almost
trap is built
immediately,
around
within
ambiguity.
hours of the US
Well,
strikes on
because the
Iranian.
moment the hidden force reveals itself too early, it becomes targetable. The moment it stays hidden, it stays useful. That is why the most dangerous phase is often before open engagement, when suspicion is rising but proof remains incomplete. This is the zone where nerves get tested. This is the zone where overreaction can be as costly as hesitation. This is the zone where one false read
Because this
can
didn't
change
start with
everything.
Iran. By the
And that is
time
why the
US
Strait
and
of
Israeli
Hormuz
forces
remains
struck
one of the
3
most
Iranian nuclear
combustible
sites in a
pieces of water
coordinated
on
campaign
Earth.
beginning in
It
late
forces
February
even
and
the
accelerating through
strongest
March
militaries to
2026,
operate
the
under
world had
pressure of
already been running
contested
hot for
choices.
years. Russia
Maybe that
invaded
is the
Ukraine
biggest
in February
takeaway of all.
2022.
The silent
That war
trap
never
is not
stopped.
really
It
a
stretched
story
across 3
about
winters,
submarines.
across
It
hundreds
is
of
a
thousands of
story about how
casualties,
modern
across a
power
Russian
works
nuclear
when the
doctrine that
environment
became
favors
increasingly
the patient,
aggressive with
the
each
hidden,
passing
and the
month.
disruptive.
By December
We live in
2025,
an age
Russia
where
was
the
publicly warning of
strongest actor
catastrophic
can still be
consequences if
cornered
NATO continued
emotionally,
pushing its so-called
economically,
dangerous
and operationally. Not because it has been beaten, but because it has been forced to carry too many risks at once. That is what a carrier in Hormuz represents. Not weakness, not defeat, but burden. The burden of being watched, the burden of signaling strength without triggering escalation, the burden of moving through water where every unseen object could become a headline, a crisis, or a spark. That is why
ever been to annihilation in the 78-year history of that clock. 1 year prior, it had been 89 seconds. The year before that, 90. The hands were accelerating. And somewhere between that press conference and the algorithm, a generation of people born after the 9th of November opened their phones, read the headline, and posted a meme about their WW3 outfits. That image, the contrast between clinical doomsday language and a TikTok girl coordinating military chic streetwear while missiles lit up the Tehran skyline, tells you everything you need to know about the generation that history
ordinary, routine, quiet, professional, controlled. And that is exactly why it would be so dangerous. Because by the time the public sees the drama, the real contest would already be underway. The fear would already be in the market. The caution would already be in the formation. The uncertainty would already be in every decision room trying to figure out whether this is deterrence, deception, or the final seconds before contact. That is what makes the undersea angle so chilling. Not the explosion, the waiting. The possibility that somewhere beneath one of the most important waterways on Earth, something small.
Here is a data point that should stop you cold. Deloitte's 2025 Global Generation Z and Millennial Survey covered 23,482 respondents across 44 countries. Over 80% reported that their long-term financial futures played a key role in their daily stress and anxiety. 52% were living paycheck to paycheck. 41% were genuinely worried they would never be able to retire. These were people in their early to mid-20s. People who hadn't even started their real working lives yet, already certain the life they'd been promised was structurally unavailable to them. Now add war to that. Not a distant war, a trending war, a war with a hashtag, a war that appeared between the cooking video and the breakup announcement. Amog Mehrotra, a 25-year-old neuroscience and AI researcher, described it with a clarity that no policy paper has managed
to. Of Hormuz. It is not just a passage. It is a test of nerve, of timing, of who can see the battlefield clearly before everyone else does. And that is why the silent net idea keeps landing with audiences. Because deep down, everyone understands the same thing. What you cannot see is often what controls the story. So, if this gave you a new perspective, hit like, then tell me in the comments which choke point becomes the real flashpoint first. Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb, or the South China Sea. And subscribe if you want more breakdowns that expose the pressure points behind the headlines before the rest of the world finally notices.